Welcome, everyone, to episode 15 of Writers and Fighters, a podcast. I'm your host, AJ Ortega, and since it's a week from WrestleMania, I thought it would be good to interview an independent pro wrestler. So I contacted my buddy, Dyl Dempsey, and we talk about a number of things. We get into lots of stuff, like his start in wrestling, his influences and memories about training, and we get the story about a recent injury, an ACL tear, and how he's still contributing to the wrestling scene despite being temporarily sidelined. So make sure to stay tuned for that interview, and that's coming up in a moment. But really quickly, I did want to give a quick shout out to friend of the show, Dalton Rasta, professional mixed martial artist. He's fighting on Friday at Bellator 256. He was on our last episode, episode 14. And so he's on the prelims of that Bellator card, which starts on Friday at 6 Eastern. That's like 4 Mountain for me, 5 if you're in Central. And you can figure out the rest, right? 6 Eastern. And you can watch that Bellator 256 headlined by Ryan Bader versus Lyoto the Dragon Machida. And that's on the Showtime app. And it's like $5 a month, if you do the 6-month deal. And you also get, Showtime boxing, and you get shows and documentaries and things like that, movies. So I think it's actually pretty legit. $5 a month just for the fight stuff that I get to access. I think it's pretty cool. They don't sponsor me, but I want them to. I want some of that Showtime money, and I'll keep plugging them. But yeah, check that out, Bellator 256. Check out the prelims and see Dalton Rasta. Lots of other good fights on there as well. And so I mentioned it's WrestleMania week, and it's a 2-night event, Saturday and Sunday, WWE's biggest show, the Super Bowl of wrestling, as it were. And the 2-night thing, that's a lot for me. I didn't watch all of it last year. Did I? No, I didn't watch all of it last year even. And so I haven't kept up in a while, and I probably won't watch it in its entirety. I'll probably catch, the good highlights I hear about or somebody lets me know about. And it's being hosted by Hulk Hogan and Titus O'Neil. And I'm not sure why that's necessary with so many other options. I'm not so sure that people even consider Hulk Hogan relevant in 2021, especially, post-racist comments and being temporarily erased from WWE history, then reinstated quietly, and now he's hosting the biggest show of the year. And I get that it's a strange year and a strange time for wrestling, and they're trying to get eyes on the product at this time. But I just think there's so many better, more relevant hosts. Gronkowski last year was interesting, a football star to host it, but he has a personality and a mainstream crossover fandom that, NFL fans coming over to see what he's up to. And so I thought that was, interesting last year. Titus O'Neil's good enough for this, as a co-host, but I don't know about hosting a whole show, and I also think it's weird that they get the black guy to work with Hulk Hogan, given the history that they booted him for, racist comments. Yeah, all that stuff is odd. I guess it's going to be 6 matches each night, more or less. And part of the deal is like, well, how do you watch it? It's no longer the traditional, order the $50 pay-per-view from your TV kind of thing with streaming services. And the WWE Network, their streaming service was, it's like defunct now in the U.S. and was absorbed by NBC and their app called Peacock. And I've never used the Peacock app, and I don't know anybody with it, to tell you the truth. But I did know, there's articles about how they were scrubbing the WWE library for old footage that isn't acceptable in NBC's eyes in 2021. The racial stuff that's too sexy or too violent. Basically most of the Attitude Era, I'm guessing. And I'm not sure how much this app costs. Yeah, so, I won't be watching it, but I'm still, plugged into the event happening this weekend. And the physical event, the COVID pandemic, meant that it was relocated from the LA area because it was going to be like WrestleMania Hollywood. That was the theme. but they ended up moving it. I think in January they finalized the decision to move it to Florida. Moving it from California to Florida because California is California and Florida is Florida because they're governed differently and the pandemic is treated differently there. So Vince McMahon took the show over there, and they're going to have like 45,000 people. And according to an article I read, they're going to have pods and social distancing, they say. I'm not sure what that looks like on TV, but I'm curious. I guess that's like 75% capacity of the stadium, according to this Forbes article I read. And so in comparison, the Super Bowl had 25,000 people in attendance, and WWE is going to have about 20,000 more, total of 45,000, if they reach their goal, sell all their tickets. I haven't seen numbers yet, don't know how ticket sales are doing. But we'll find out. We'll find out next week, and I'll maybe babble a few minutes about it. In any case, that's enough of the babbling for now. Let's get to that interview. This is Dyl Dempsey, professional wrestler on the independent scene there in South Texas, based out of Laredo. Enjoy. All right, I am joined here with Dyl Dempsey, pro wrestler from Laredo. How you doing, Dyl?
Hey, my man. First of all, thank you for having me here, and I've been doing good. Just going day by day and living positive vibes as best as I can.
Cool, man. I know you had a little bit of a, let's call it a roadblock, a hiccup or something like that in terms of your wrestling career. You had an injury. We'll get to that soon enough. It was a knee injury from what I understand. I want to, maybe hear some about that and moving forward. But what first got you into pro wrestling?
When I was a kid, I was like a pretty rowdy kid, like a wild child. I was like hard to, settle down. I guess I was like really hyper, and my parents would try to find something like to calm me down, like whether it be music, something on TV or whatnot. But just one day, my mom happened to put on wrestling on TV, and all of a sudden, just bam, right there, I sat down like a rock, and I watched like ever since. I guess, like the wrestling and the violence of it, like as a kid, got me into it, and it's like, wow, this is so cool. I want to do that too. And years later, got into the video games and figured out, oh, there's independent wrestling, and here we are today. Long story short.
That's interesting to me that your mom was the one that put that shit on the TV, and then you're like, okay, well, this is interesting. Let me look at these guys, with baby oil and tights and the illusion of fighting. Let me latch on to this. But I was, same story for me, except I didn't end up as a wrestler. You did. One of my questions is, you were a child at that point, but, once you move into like adolescence and then adulthood, did you do sports before you did the pro wrestling stuff?
I briefly did, not for very long periods of time, but I used to be in T-ball like when I was little. That was like the first one I was in, and then in the 4th grade, I was in basketball for my school. And in 7th grade, I was in football. And I just did that, like to kind of, I guess I just wanted to feel what it was like to like be in athletics and whatnot. But to me, it's like, this is not wrestling, but hey, at least I'm like doing something, because down in Laredo, there's no like school wrestling, like the mat wrestling, the amateur wrestling and all that. Like there's none of that. So I couldn't at the time understand the experience of it. So I was just like, well, let me at least do a sport and see how it feels, but nothing compared to it. And I was just like, well, like I just couldn't give my all to it, and it wasn't fair. So I just did like a year probably of each just to like, say I did it and tried it out,
Yeah, just get a taste of it. Like, again, like a late elementary school, middle school and stuff like that. I think it's interesting that you point out that there was an attempt to like seek freestyle wrestling or Greco-Roman wrestling, what maybe our audience might understand as Olympic wrestling, right? Mat wrestling, and that this is a physical competition, and that you're like, well, pro wrestling comes from those roots, right? Again, pro wrestling is an illusion, and it's a piece of theater, and it's a piece of art, and so on, but it comes from ancient Roman shit, like that Greco-Roman style of mat wrestling and pinning another person and manipulating the body and so on. I think that's really interesting that it's not as popular as it should be, I think.
Right.
That it wasn't a thing there in Laredo, and so you went to other sports, and I think that's cool. I think that, seeking that athleticism, fitness, and so on is really cool. How and when did you make that leap? Because I've been acquainted with you for many years, you as a wrestler, me as a referee. One of my things is that, like, you were young, and I run into a lot of young cats. I really do. Again, just the handful of gigs I've done, you run into some young talent. When did you move from that, like, okay, I'm going to try these kind of sports, but now I'm going to move into this pro wrestling world where I adopt a character. I have to do these feats of athleticism while being in character and acting in a certain regard. How did you get into that world?
Pretty much right when I found out that there was such a thing as indie wrestling, like, around me, because I always knew, like, growing up, there was WWE, TNA, Ring of Honor, like all those big companies at the time, before we have like 20 big ones now that are on TV, which is amazing nowadays, So
For sure.
I found that out in, like, I believe it was late 2011, early to mid 2012, when I found out there was, like, in Laredo, there was LWA, 5-Star, ROW, and they were like joint at the time. So they ran together or they ran separately, but
sharing
the
a lot of
same
talent and stuff like that, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like they would share talent and run different shows. That's when I found out, whoa, this is actually possible here. I didn't have to, because this was before there was a performance center. This was before there was like a public place to be like, hey, want to be a wrestler at so-and-so, go join here. Like, before it was a big thing, like in the late teens, like 2013, when it was all open and stuff. So when I found that out, I was like, oh, I got to try this out. And a good friend of mine who lives in San Antonio now, but ran a shop in Laredo, the wrestling shop, Oscar Zamaron, big shout out to him, by the way. He ran the wrestling shop in Laredo that was like full of memorabilia, merchandise, and figures and games and all that. He helped out with LWA at the time before running his own promotion. And me and my good friend, I'm sure you remember Kyrie, right?
Yeah, we're acquainted for sure. Yeah, I worked a couple gigs with him. Yes.
Yeah, he's a good guy. Shout out to him again, by the way, Kyrie. Me and him would be regulars at his shop like every few days until Oscar took a notice to us. He's like, yeah, you guys are young, right? Would you want to be wrestlers? Like, he kind of offered it to us at first, like joking around, because he didn't know we were really serious about it. But then I talked to him. Yeah, because I didn't think about it either, because I was still maybe 16, 17 at the time. And I was like, whoa, like it was mind-boggling to me still, and it took me a bit to process that wrestling was here in town and there was a chance to do it. So finally, in the summer of 2013, I talked to Oscar, and he seemed, interested in what I had to say. And he's like, well, how old are you right now? I'm like, I'm 17. And he's like, when do you turn 18? And it was in September. His next show was November that year. He's like, just to be safe, let's work with 18. So in November, I'll give you a shot. I'm like, oh crap, really? Cool.
Nice.
And this was a wide-eyed 18-year-old at the time who didn't understand like the kinks of the business. Just like, think of it as, the best way I could describe it is the movie Ready to Rumble with David Arquette.
Yeah, I remember that movie. Yeah, the WCW movie for sure. Yeah.
Yes. Like, he didn't understand like the aspects of it. He was like still just a fan of it. And like, that was me at the time. And I was like, whoa, I get to do this, not knowing what I'm getting myself into. And then there's me buying like this so-called quote unquote gear from Academy just to somewhat look like a wrestler. And
yeah, just like
I debuted in a Royal Rumble.
Some bootleg Under Armour, right? Like, it's great, Dyl.
Again, folks, I was 18, didn't know. I got smart enough eventually, and I'm like, great, let me get my own stuff, Yes. And so I was in a Rumble.
I'm going to pause you there. And so tell me, so you're saying you show up in a Rumble at a certain point. Let's rewind a little bit into the training. I'm always curious about people being thrown into a new environment, specifically in a training and coaching environment. And the wrestling world is weird as shit. And so I'm always curious. Like, I've been in kung fu gyms, boxing gyms in those first week or two. Certain stuff happens and so on. But the wrestling world is quite different. Professional wrestling and this act of theater and this act of athleticism being combined. Tell me about the early training.
You see, that's a really good one, because I was actually going to sort of tie into that with that previous question, because it kind of goes hand in hand. But when it comes to the latter part, like the part of character and theater and audience and all that, I was, ever since I believe I was a sophomore in high school, I was into theater. Like I took classes there, and I was like, oh, this is fun. This is as closest to wrestling as I'm going to get without being physical, because I understand it's, audience, character work and all that. And that leads to college, where I got a minor in theater arts.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah. My major is communications with a minor in theater arts, which is the best part. So that part alone, I feel like I somewhat aced, because I was prepared for this for quite some time. But when it comes to the training aspect, and then I've said this before, I'm not ashamed to say it because of how long I've been doing this, but I was barely trained at all, to be very honest. Because again, I was still in the mindset of, I'm going to be a wrestler. I thought of it as a season mode in a wrestling game. I just create myself and I'm right there instantly.
Yeah.
But before I did the Rumble, I was invited to, I believe it was Iron. It was at a gym called Iron Body in Laredo, where I did nothing but rolls, like front rolls, back rolls, core rolls, like the basic rolls. But that's all I did for maybe a few sessions, only a few sessions. Cause I was like, oh, okay, maybe this is evasiveness or balance stuff. This was me thinking of it at the time before I got into the Rumble, not knowing yet how to bump, properly do moves. I somehow survived, but I didn't do anything stupid. Mm-hmm. Thankfully, I was a kid, but I wasn't, stupid to hey, let me try a Hurricane Rana. Let me do a moonsault. Nah.
Sure.
So to kind of, unless this was a later question, I was going to say, I was going to leave it up to you. I was going to say how I finally found proper training and how the two schools that I went to and stuff.
Yeah. Tell me, please.
Okay. Yeah. I got you. I didn't know if it was a before and after, but yeah, I'll combine it right now.
No. So, it's just we're loose, man. It's a loose conversation. You take it any direction you want, man. Yeah, I love it. You're good storyteller so far. So go for it.
Cool. All right, my man, I got you. So this was in late 2013 when I started, and I remember I guess I could qualify this one as a training, but it was only my second ever match later, and the guy I was facing was kind of rough at the time. He was kind of an old school guy. And he's like, whoa, you don't know how to bump yet? What are you doing? And he made me hit the ropes and bump at least 75 times. So it was, oh my God, not knowing how to do it. He's telling me, your elbows don't hit like that. Oh, you have to have flat palms and
flat palms, attack the mat, all those things. I've seen very little of that, and it's and again, just observing it, I'm like, three of those in a row, one takes the wind out of you. It's one of those things. I remember being 15, 16, falling out of a tree flat on my back and just being the wind knocking. I'm like, you just got to acclimate yourself to that to be a wrestler, because that's the back bump, right? And so you do it 75 times. So number 76 is a little bit easier.
Just a bit, but he wasn't I'm saying it now as if I'm going back in time and I know what I had to do, but he was just adamant on oh, just this and that. Cause I don't know. He just, I wanted to really test me, and I was going to face him at that show, and he just wanted me to learn a basic thing, but it's no, man, just keep doing it. But he wasn't exactly very helpful. It was just kind of oh, let's just see him do it, versus trying to help, which I eventually learned, growing up. But that was my first bumping session, if you could call it that. So sure. That was early 2014. And now we have to skip about a year and a half later to where I knew of the place for ever since I started, but I never really got to meet the guy behind it. And I know you know him very well, but Ben Bones.
Of course.
Yeah. I finally got acquainted with him like in the late summer of 2015, where finally it took some convincing and such because he didn't really know me that well. And I was like, quote unquote, with the other company, because that's when there was drama back then with that. Unfortunately, it's like that with wrestling. It's like
I think
the
it's
sun's
part
up
of
in
the
the day,
it
you
is
know?
part of the wrestling world. You know, there's a little bit of drama, competing promotions and stuff like that. But yeah, Ben Bones, good man.
Yeah.
He gave me my first refereeing gig through Luis Spartan Ramirez.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
and so Five Star Wrestling has a special place in my heart and in my own, you know, very minimal refereeing history. That Ben Bones, the founder of Five Star
Yes.
Wrestling, was quite good to me. And again, yeah, shout out to him for sure.
Oh yeah. Big shout out to Ben. You know, he basically sort of started the fuel to the rocket strap to get me out there because he trained me from like bottom to as far as he could, like the best that he could, because it was kind of like, oh, like I'm going to show you what I like. His mentality, and this is like a big mentality that I have, is like, hey, I'm going to show you all that I know, but when I'm done showing you, don't be afraid to go out there and go to someone else because they may know what I don't know. They may know more. They may know how to fix that and fix this, and that's why my mentality, not to just stick to one place until like you graduate and it's like, oh, okay, I'm just going to be stuck there.
Yeah, you should
I
have lots of
Yeah.
teachers in whatever craft you have. I'm a big believer of that. Like, you got to have a lot of different teachers because they only have a certain amount of tools in their toolbox. And that's even me as a English professor and creative writing teacher. I'm like, that's one of the things I'm like, if you want to take another one of my classes, cool, but maybe take somebody else's class because it's going to open your eyes to other philosophies that I don't have. And that's a thing in all crafts, including pro wrestling. That's awesome. That's a good thing to notice at that young of an age, I think.
Definitely, it opened up my eyes too, like with a lot of things that he showed me and the students he trained. And a bit of a fun fact, I'm the last graduate of Ben Bones' class before he had to move because of
Of
his
course.
job. Yeah,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
So Five Star closed for like a little bit, like for about a good year and a half, until the man you mentioned, Luis Spartan Ramirez, is now the head trainer of Five Star, and I still go, you know, to get my reps, to help out as much as I can. He's basically said I'm like his second, you know, versus where he's the actual trainer, the one that has like the graduate rights and like the one, like he basically makes the decisions, but I'm like the second, you know, like, oh
No,
hey Dyl, like
yeah,
there's the example.
I've seen you on the Five Star Instagram and stuff, working out with them and stuff like that. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So shout out to Spartan Ramirez,
Oh yeah.
episode one of Writers and Fighters. So
Ooh, good stuff.
good
Good stuff.
plug.
Yeah, big plug. And like this goes back to what like the final part of it, to what I said about Ben mentioning about different trainers, different trainees. Once I graduated, I was pretty much, I don't want to say stuck, but I was pretty much just in Laredo in that time for most of the time, rolling around elsewhere and trying to help people with the little like basics and stuff that they needed. And that's what kind of helped me out. Like we grew with each other, like in the ROW, shout out to them in Laredo where I went. And that's where I was once Five Star was temporarily closed until this was around 2018. And this is a huge shout out to this man as well, Rodney Mack. When I met him, when he moved to Texas, for a former WWE superstar, Rodney Mack, since day one, we instantly clicked. Like he liked something about me, like basically how my character was and some things in the ring. And he's like, oh, like one of these days I would love to train with you and teach you stuff that I know and polish up some of the things that I see. And this eventually led to the Dog Pound Wrestling Dojo being opened in San Antonio last summer. And now I go back and forth to Five Star and Dog Pound in San Antonio. So I'm with both of them at the moment. So I'm representing both trainings right now.
No, that's great. That's awesome. And so at a certain point you get your wrestling chops and this and that. You're training quite a bit. How do you seek bookings and appearances as a wrestler? And so you're connected with a couple promotions, but again, like you want to spread it around, right? And so
Yeah.
how do you go about that? Because I heard you were the most booked guy from Laredo.
Oh boy.
I heard something like that on the interwebs. I don't know. You tell me.
I don't know about right now, but maybe before this injury. But
Yeah, we'll get to that soon enough. Yeah,
we'll get
so
to that,
we'll
folks.
get
Don't worry.
there.
Don't worry. We got an order to keep here. Yeah, it's all good. Well, that's the funny thing, because this goes back to one of the first things I've heard in training. When it comes to wrestling, there's no blueprint. Everybody has a different path, which eventually leads somewhere. It's not just, oh, here's A, B, and C. It's like A, here we go. Now it's all these different routes, and including bookings as well. It can go from sometimes by word of mouth. Hey, we heard someone dropped out of the card. We got this worker from Laredo who has so-and-so experience, trained by who, maybe give him a shot. Or it could be as simple as posting a highlight video on social media. It could get someone's attention for something that you did, or simply reaching out, just throwing feelers out there to different promotions, or talking to someone who's reputable in a certain promotion. Like, hey, is it possible if you could give me a good word? I could go over there, shake some hands, maybe have a tryout, help out. Like, there's a lot of elements, to be honest. There's no, in my opinion, a set way to do it. Everybody operates differently when it comes to promotions and who they look for and who they book and such, is what I've learned over time.
No, that's a really good observation, in that there's several different avenues in terms of getting your name out there. Things like word of mouth, social media. So and so said this guy's pretty good. Should we book him? Putting your highlight reels out there and things like that. And it's one of those things. It's like, well, independent wrestler means you're independent. It means you.
Yes.
Right. And so you gotta project what you think is best to get you booked.
Yeah, definitely.
Tell me a little bit about maybe your favorite memories in the ring, like anybody you've worked with, particular shows or matches where you've put in the reps and you're like, man, that's a good memory. That was a cool match. That was something that propelled me somewhere.
Technically, I would have two, because one is like for the memory aspect, because of involving the crowd and having them feel something, versus where the other one that I'm going to mention is one that would eventually propel me to even bigger things, just by doing something so little that meant so much. So the first one, this one, I guess, would be a little bit cheesy, but I mean, this one's a very personal one to me, in the sense of like, oh, it's like a movie/storybook ending in a good way. Yeah, this was back in and I'm good with dates, by the way, so if I mention random dates, it's like, wait a minute, how does he know all this? Just good memory at the moment.
And that's awesome. But that's great. You're lucky.
I'm a month at date kind of guy. It's weird, but this was back in February 2018, where it was a benefit show in Laredo, where the funds were going to my father at the time, that was battling stage 4 pancreatic cancer. And it was like this big in the sense of like, I'm surprised how many people went and donated and took their time to the show in a great way. Like, it's a very special place to my heart, and especially regarding the match. And this is a big shout out to Ricky Suarez as well, a guy that I've worked for so many years on and off. And we're just like, sunlight and daytime. We click very well, and we always have. I'm not sure why, but we always have. And it's like, that night it showed as well, because it was a classic old school story of like, oh, here's the man who's fighting like for his father, defending his championship against this heel who just doesn't, give a damn. He's just a prick. It's funny. It's kind of a role reversal, because usually I'm that guy, but he was that guy tonight.
That's awesome.
So it was kind of a breath of fresh air, So we had the match, and everything went well for the most part, despite it being a bit misty, because it was kind of raining, but nothing pouring, thankfully. So we didn't have to postpone that show or at the end of it. So what's hilarious is I found this out after the fact, which makes this a little bit bittersweet but amazing, is what originally was going to happen, which did happen, is that he eventually cheated to roll me up using the ropes to win the title at that show. And it will eventually lead to the announcer going like, hey, wait a minute. And he went very passionate in this. Like, it almost broke me in a good way. He's like, hold on there, Swaze. On a night that we're battling cancer, we're not going to let this crap happen. We're going to have a fair finish. I'm like, God.
That's so pro wrestling. It's fucking
beautiful.
And it's like, people from the listen to this that aren't plugged into pro wrestling. Wow, that's a beautiful thing. Again, because we know it's a piece of theater, but you've included this thing that's quite real to you. And again, in the hero and villain story, like throwing it in there, that's the thing I love about wrestling, the storytelling. I was like, that is a beautiful thing to me. I love that.
Oh yeah. Big shout out to Lieutenant Dan. He went hard on that promo. So he sold it really well. And eventually it got restarted. It was like a quick little back and forth. Finally got the huge win, and it was like an amazing support factor there. And what I didn't know before that is when he originally won and took the title, the APW Openweight title, apparently my dad was next to Kyrie at the time, because he's the one that told me. And oh man, I'm gonna say it as best as I can, because honestly, I don't curse. That's just me, but I know how to like work around it.
Of course,
but when he saw that decision, he's like, "Oh, what kind of bullshit is this?" And whoa, my Kyrie was like, "Wait, calm down. I think something's gonna happen.
It's part of the bit, Pops."
Yeah. Kyrie didn't know that second finish was gonna happen, so I think he calmed him down perfectly. And then when the real one happened, yeah, my boy, he was like that kind of dad, and I was like, damn, he believed that finish. Jesus.
No, again, and that's like I've gotten emotional over, wrestling on TV, but then there's a personal connection there. When you're live, the storyline has to do with you. Like again, that is the power of storytelling and the power of pro wrestling, and that it can actually move people. Like,
oh yeah,
like I want to be moved emotionally whenever if I'm watching TV show, or if I'm reading a book, or if I'm watching a pro wrestling match. Like if I'm looking at any piece of art, like I want to be moved. Something emotionally has to happen, whether it's me laughing my ass off or me getting angry like your pops did. Like that's awesome, man. I think that's great. Tell me, and let's go real. Again, you and I are acquainted. We've worked together here and there on a couple shows, and you and I both may be like on social media are quite open with our losing our people, right? And you allude to your pops being ill, and
yeah,
and losing your old man, and then still persisting through your craft. I lost my little bro in 2014. Then my pops in 2016. You still have shit you got to do, things you want to get off the ground, and your people aren't there, right? But you've persisted through that, and I've observed it and admired it. Tell me about that and losing your pops, but still persisting through that shit that he saw you doing, like the pro wrestling thing. Like you're doing that thing you wanted to do, and now he's not around.
I totally get you, man. I'm open to it, as tough as it is. It's been 3 years and it's never going to be easy, but like it's still a very good story in my opinion about, perseverance and keeping on going as much as your loved ones are suffering,
For sure.
Back in August 2017, it was actually at the Lucha at the Library show, the I think third one, 56. Yeah, the third one.
Yeah.
That very day is when I found out, because he's been battling the pancreatic cancer at the time for almost a year. So he was persevering as best as he could, because he had stage 2B at the time. But on that very day is when I found out it moved to stage 4, like the morning, afternoon.
No way.
So it was like,
I was at that gig. I worked that gig. I saw that's where we hung out. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was your final show, wasn't it? Or was it next year?
It was the third or fourth one, but yeah, I think it was the third one. I did the first 3, I believe.
Was 3.
But yeah, and that was when I was like, and it's one of those things really quickly, Dylan, we'd been around each other, and you were always one of the guys that was like, "Hey AJ, what's up? How you doing?" And I appreciated that. Like going into the locker room when you're not one of the regular dudes. You know how it is. I wanted to thank you, and I'm going to thank you in front of everybody listening, that I always just appreciated that you were just kind and like inviting and just really nice. And most people in the wrestling world are nice, And but that you were particularly like, "Hey, AJ drove down here. Hey, what's up?" And so I appreciate that. And I was at that gig, dude, that Lucha at the Library at Laredo, and that's when you heard your pops got the bad diagnoses that morning?
Oh yeah, dude. It was a whirlwind of emotions, and like that day definitely distracted me because I was with a bunch of good people and good vibes all around. And yeah, I mean, no need to thank me, man. It's because my philosophy is like, hey, we're wrestlers second, but humans beings first. I don't want to get that twisted because then that'd be different. That's my opinion on that, of course.
Beautiful, beautiful.
So when I found out that day, it was also very special because that's the day I won the internet title at 5-star.
Yes, sir.
So it was like a big old distraction in a good way for not only me, but my family as well, because both my parents were there and they didn't always go to that together because I guess my dad was like not very much of a, what would the word be? Like he didn't really like going to gatherings as long as it was like maybe, just with my mom, like at a small like bar at a small concert or like with their family friends. But when it came to wrestling and certain shows, it's like, heck yeah, we're going to go. And especially Lucha at the Library shows, they went to a good chunk of those, honestly. So it was really awesome for that. He lasted to his detriment a lot longer than doctors estimated because he was in his, I believe at that time, in his early 50s, late 40s, battling this. Like he wasn't even, expected to last more than around 3 or 4 more months from what I heard, because it's like the worst stage for a guy his age. It's like, the time's not there, unfortunately. And another uphill thing I was going through was my senior year in college, and I was graduating that May in 2018, like for sure, because that was one of the big things. My dad wanted me to pursue an education as like best as I can, and like he never forced it upon me, but I always wanted to. Is like, hey, have a plan B just in case, unfortunately, wrestling wouldn't work. And that's what I worked for on the side with wrestling. So that was a big thing. And I remember, I believe this was a few weeks before he wasn't really able to speak anymore. One of the last things he told me was like, not to worry, not to give up, and just keep on, especially because I was so close to graduation. It's like, please focus on that. And like, it'll take care of the rest, So my mom and the nurses and family friends were all around him while I was going through finals, worrying about him, worrying about wrestling. So it was like a triple threat of chaos in my head. And I remember, like, I don't want to say it's because to me, I never experienced anything like losing a very close family member that I see every day until around that time. So it took me a little while to like adjust to like, oh my God, what's going on here? It's when I saw that he was really bad the last, few weeks and such. I remember it was so real to the point 5 days before I went to the Valley for a booking. And I remember this was May 5th, 2018, a few days before, and I had a obligated booking over in San Benito, Texas, in the Valley. And I remember this was the day it sort of got real for me, because I remember like my mom was never opposed to me going, especially like during this time, because she felt that like in her mind, seeing that I'm just a young man, I was like 22, 23 at the time, going to be 23 later, that if I saw this, that it might get me, down, to the point where I may not pull through like for college and whatnot. Like that was her mentality. Like, she's like, hey, I don't want you to see you go through this a whole lot. If you need a distraction, totally understandable. And that's when she pulled me to the side and it was like, look, I'm not going to tell you if anything happens, but when you get home, that's when you know, because you're going to be driving and all that, and 2.5, almost 3 hours to and from. And
There's
it's
a
like,
risk there, sure.
If I got that text while during that, it's like, oh no, what would my mentality would be down, and who knows what would have happened,
Pull over in the middle of nowhere, Texas, and just be a mess. Like, come on. Yeah, no, that's awesome. Wow.
Yeah, legit, big shout out to her. And thankfully, when I got home, he was still there, and I was like, okay. And that was the last show I had while he was around. And I know that for sure, because I remember, I think it was that Monday, if I'm not mistaken, that upcoming Monday, where all of a sudden he got put into hospice in Laredo. And that's when it hit me even more. I'm like, something like, this was a weird process for me, because I never went through something like this.
It's all foreign. It's all foreign. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was the week of finals. And I was taking my last maybe 2 or 3. Like that part still hazy to me because I wasn't focused on it, to be honest, but I had to because I remembered his words and my mom's words. And it's like, I got to do this. I got to distract myself for several hours on campus or at home studying as best as I can. So when it came to classes and even training, I think I was still going to training, surprisingly. I would always visit afterwards for a little bit, like before visiting hours were closed, or not closed, but I think only a limited amount of people could stay. If I'm not mistaken, that was the tricky part. Or it's like, oh, you need to go study.
Planning.
You were here for a few hours. Yeah. So I would see him those few days. And then I remember it was, because I think it was a Thursday, May 10th. It was the day before. I remember I was with him, and I think I had a final that tomorrow or that Friday or something like that. Like, that's the part I'm confused on. Like, I know for sure Friday I had a show in the morning at a school and then afternoon night in San Antonio. I remember it was 4 hours before, and I told him, like, hey, like, I love you. I'll see you tomorrow after school or whatnot, still not understanding fully, like, whoa.
How
like,
close? Yeah.
Yeah. And this was, like you said, naive, foreign of me, not knowing. And then I remember like a few minutes after midnight, like that Thursday, I got the call from my mom. And, it was peaceful, like he eventually had that big gasp, as they say, like right before. And a few minutes later, just slowly but surely, like within a few minutes. And she was like, I want you to stay home. I'll be home in a couple of hours. I'm going to let you know what's going to happen. And right there, like I was just, I had to call my friends, like I talked to 3 of my closest friends and my then girlfriend at the time. And we, like, that was the distraction. And for sure, like that, I'm going to be okay. I needed before she got home, because I was alone while my mom and her friends were like over there tending to him. And I remember literally I got calls like once the news came out of like, hey, if you don't want to wrestle on Friday, which would be tomorrow technically, you're totally fine. I'm like, no, dude, I need to do this. I have
to show up.
A distraction. Yeah, like I had to buck up, like it's like I don't want to be at home thinking. I want to be distracted and doing what I continue to love for him. And now I'm doing it for him, for everybody that's going through something and needs something to fight for. And that's what's been the main things I've been doing ever since. And it's because of those last several months that I mentioned that were very rough, going through all that.
Wow, dude, what a powerful story. And again, your mom just being such a soldier, and boys in the wrestling community, again, being in your corner. Again, as tragic as a story is, like, there's that beautiful part of it is that, your pop saw you do your shit, the wrestling stuff, and you're like, okay, well, I can go still do that gig. I did the same thing when my old man passed away. I was like, I got to go do a conference, like halfway across the country and come back. And, I just buried him and go and get on a plane and go actually go talk about wrestling. I think it was in Philly or DC. I forget where. East Coast. It's all a blur now. Like you said, it's just it's
yeah,
weird
it
to put it all together.
Yeah.
It is kind of a blur. But shout out to your pops, 100%. Shout out to your family. I think it's awesome, and it was one of those things I observed, because I always saw when you would be like, oh, I got good grades and this and that, and then you graduated. I believe in education. I'm an English professor and stuff like this, and so that was one of those things. I was like, oh, Dylan's doing his stuff wrestling wise, but he's also getting himself a degree. I love and admire that your folks planted that in you, but weren't like beating you over the head with it, but that you were like, I gotta do this. It's a practical, smart thing to do. And there's good schools there in fucking Laredo, dude. I mean, it's, again, the CC there and the university and stuff. It's you have good opportunities there for sure.
Oh yeah, definitely, man. It was a journey with college.
I love that your pops had an impression on you. I don't even have to ask that. Like, I know you looked up to your old man. Let's shift back to the pro wrestling world. Like, who do you look up to in terms of like pro wrestling superstars or independent wrestlers that you think are pretty sharp? Like who are maybe your influences or inspirations in terms of your craft of pro wrestling?
When it comes to like the big stars, that would kind of like be a two-part answer, because one is like what you were alluding to when it comes to the craft, but then another is kind of like to the present and who this guy still is basically. And it's like, that's what inspired me to keep on like trying and keep on going. But I mean, as much of a bad rep as this guy gets, but when it comes to the style, definitely guys like a Chris Benoit or a Dynamite Kid, like that catch as catch can, like aggressive wrestling style that looks not only believable, but it's also highly athletic, highly intense. And I'm trying to like aspire that, like when it comes to the, like what we mentioned way back when it came to like the Greco-Roman and the grappling, it's like, that's the essentials of it, because what does the marquee say? Wrestling. And I'm a big proponent of that. And I know wrestling is like there's multiple definitions of it, especially with professional wrestling, because it's there's a lot of different styles involved. There's drama, there's the theater portion of it that you mentioned. So like guys like that and Kurt Angle, especially Eddie Guerrero.
That was the ones I was going to throw in there when you mentioned Benoit and Dynamite Kid, and then somebody who has a similar style but like newer and adapted to that kind of attractive style. Kurt Angle being again that aggressive. There's a certain amount of legitimacy with those kinds of guys that have a version of the shoot fighting background, shoot wrestling, I should say, and yeah, that explosiveness and that like, okay, well, this is the illusion of fighting, but it has to look like fighting.
Yeah, at least in a sense, yeah. Like when it comes to that portion of it, and there's many more, but those are the ones that have like stood out to me growing up. And when it comes to the other side of it, and also how good he really, really was all this time, the Undertaker, especially for like how much respected that he is throughout the business, and that he's kept himself like relevant all this time for over 30 years without changing too much, minus being like, the American badass. But then look what happened. Boom, back to the dead man. And no one really complained, and that
the longest longevity of a wrestler aside from Ric Flair, maybe like,
yeah, Ric Flair's close, if not right there.
But right up there. But again, that he didn't waver from the gimmick. He didn't, again, that he's never not been around, right? And so you can't ignore people. It's like, whenever I think, you got to look at whatever the thing is that you're doing, and you're looking at that same area or arena for inspiration or idols and things like this. Well, look just at the very top and then study them. And why are they at the very top, right? If you're in basketball, how are you not looking at everything LeBron is doing, right? The Michael Jordans of the world and the Currys of the world. And then pro wrestling, we have the same versions of that. Like even as a subset, like in the refereeing world, right? Like, and like, I'm like, there's a handful of referees. I'm like, they're extra good. And so how do you zero in on that and study them and learn something from that? So I think Undertaker might be one of the best, if not the best, example of that.
Oh, definitely. And to go a little bit more active, a guy like Randy Orton over the years, and still going strong and being so simple yet so effective. And it's like, he's a guy to definitely study because of pacing, character, and just how he's been doing this for 20 plus years.
Consistent. Yeah.
And he's still high level. He's still in like a main storyline nowadays. It's like, oh, he's not like the guy that's like, oh, I'm going to pass the torch to the young guys. It's like, no, he's still at a high caliber main event level all this time.
Several years in him still. Totally. Yeah. Again, because he has a very economical approach, and people may argue that, well, he's not super exciting and this and that. I'm like, but he's the most consistent. He doesn't get injured, doesn't injure people. Like that's the best employee you could hire, right? And he still has a draw. He's always gonna too. Yeah, I agree. Randy Orton's a good one for sure.
Oh yeah, definitely, man.
Mm-hmm. So tell me about the injury. I know that's
here we are.
It's a heartbreaker. Fuck. And so tell me about the injury and the aftermath and the plans now.
Whew. Alrighty. So, and this was a good time to ask it too, because of what I know now, because it took a little bit of time to know what was going on and the extent of it, because the only other wrestling injury I really suffered was a dislocated shoulder back in 2016, but thankfully it was just that. There was no tears, no breaks.
Oh, that's minimal compared to shit that can happen, for sure.
Definitely, and the big concern was like, oh, if it's a torn labrum, you need surgery, because it's possible if you dislocate it that severe, there may be a chance. But over the years, it's like, I haven't had many issues with it, and I was still going strong, like at a high level as best as I can. So I'm like, okay, like my shoulder may bug me in cold weather, but I mean, that's normal with injuries, everybody goes through that.
Yeah, for
but
sure.
I'm good with that, thankfully. And when it came to this one, this started back in February 21st of this year. And it was at a local show called Lucha Maniacs in Laredo, a relatively new show. Like, they've only been running since, I think, September or August of last year. Like, they're very fresh, but they're getting a lot of acclaim already for the stars they're bringing. So it was just a normal day. Like, there was a seminar before the show, hours before, and everything was good. And I was the third match on the card out of like several, of course. It was like maybe 9 or 10. It was like a big show. And I wasn't thinking anything of it, because I was in the ring beforehand doing a seminar or participating in one, and the ring felt good. Then I was in the ring a little bit beforehand to try some things. Okay, it's good. But the thing is with that ring, unfortunately, and this is not, talking down, because it's true. Many people can attest to this. That ring over the years has somewhat deteriorated, like mainly with the padding and the positioning of the boards, like being, I guess, loose or unstable after
there's deep spots and high spots. Yeah, I've worked on those.
Yeah.
I've worked on several rings like that. Sure, yeah, it's part of the indie wrestling world, unfortunately. Sure, 100%.
Oh yeah, and a bit of a spoiler, I found that out later, but I'll get to that in a second. I don't want to cut corners here. We're getting the scoops here, but either way, you got you, brother. I got you. So, I didn't think anything of it. Everything was fine, and I was in a tag team match with I'm not sure if you ever met him or heard of him, but Raxo, a big guy.
No, I never
he has like
him.
half. No, well, I think he started right when you were out the door from Laredo, like right around that time. But me and him have been like, road pals, tag team partners, a bit of rivals, good friends for quite some time. So I was teaming up with him that day, and he was taught old school in the sense of taking care of the ring and making sure everything's good. Like, that was one of the things I was taught too, but he takes it, to his credit, to a very high level, which is very respectable of him. So this does not fall on him whatsoever.
For sure.
But so during like our entrance and stuff, I was just doing a promo while we were doing our entrances, and I had the match in mind. I'm like, okay, this is going to be so fun. I already got the crowd riled up as best as I could, but I didn't notice this until the playback of the video. But he was looking at the ring that had concerned, like, he's like, something looks off here. Like, he was trying to fix up some boards and such, which unfortunately those boards were very visible because the skirts were not even tied properly, because it was like a little bit rushed, unfortunately, throughout the show.
Sure.
I'm not exactly sure why, but it's like, okay, I've been in way worse situations. I've been in smaller rings that are like not that well, obviously.
Of course.
I'm like, this is just another Sunday to me, like, okay, here we go. Let's have a match, And the first half, everything was going fine, because it was about almost a 10-minute match, to be honest, with everything that happened. And about halfway into it, there was a deal where I was getting lifted up to land on my feet, like basically off of a back suplex, but I got pushed off to land, on my feet. And I braced myself like normal, like every single day, like boom, I braced myself, because there's a certain way to brace yourself for a fall. And that part was fine. It wasn't exactly the fall. It was my right leg happening to land on one of the boards that was down, and because you get me, like, you expect the landing, like, here's the ring, you would land it, right?
And you flex, and you kind of get your body ready to land at that juncture, but it's 3 inches shorter or whatever on the right side or something.
Yes, perfect description. Wow. And right when it happened, it happened like a shotgun blast. It felt very fast, and I knew something was up, because I'm like, yo, this is bad. Like, the way I could describe the landing is if you stepped on a soda can and it crushes straight down. That's what I felt.
Holy
Like I didn't
fuck,
feel,
dude.
yeah, like I didn't feel any twists, any bends. And even looking back in the video, which I'm going to get to, it didn't look like that. You see the culprit right there. My foot is on, and you see where the gap happens, where it sinks down when it's not supposed to. It was on that one board that wasn't able to get fixed because Raxo, even in the video, and this shows how much he cares, he was moving the boards while like I was about to do something.
Even them up, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but that one
It was
board,
just too fucked. Yeah,
unfortunately,
yeah, for sure.
and I knew if I continued, this would be worse because that's the kind of pain I felt. And I'm like, what the hell just happened? Like, I don't know if it was my ankle or if it was something with my leg because I was totally unknown to it at the time. So I threw up the X and I went to the back. And I was a mixture of emotions. I was confused, annoyed, angry. I'm like, no, I want to finish this, but I don't know if I can. But then finally, like 3 minutes later, the promoter or one of the bookers was like, hey, they're about to go home. I'm like, nah, screw this. So I went back up with adrenaline, went out there, and we knew the finish, thankfully. And Rexo kind of looked at me. He's like, oh, yeah, you're good. Yeah. Boom. He's like, finish. Okay, cool. We went into the finish flawlessly, and bam, we got to the end like nothing. And the thing I've always said is adrenaline's a hell of a feeling, you know?
Right.
And I felt okay, but I knew something was up. Like when I finally got to take my boot off and my knee pad down, for a while, it still felt like I was wearing a knee pad. I knew something was wrong.
Wow.
I'm like, what is going on? And I was up and down trying to like, keep it moving a bit. And I felt okay, but there was like noticeably a limp. And
Sure.
I knew what was happening. When I woke up, I knew this was going to feel so much worse because adrenaline. And here we are. I woke up that Monday morning so much worse. And I'm like, what the hell? Like, ow. You know, like I couldn't bend it back all the way. It still felt like I was wearing maybe 2 knee pads instead of 1. Like it felt like it was a big old swelling, which it was. It was like on my calf and around my knee area. I'm like, what the heck? And I heard the opinions of everybody, like when they saw the video and when I told them what I was feeling, they're like, oh, it's maybe just a strain rather than an actual tear. Because if it's an actual tear, you wouldn't be walking right now. Yeah, like you wouldn't be walking. You'd feel so much more pain and all that. So I took a few days off from training until that Thursday at 5-star. And for the most part, everything was okay. Just with certain movements and rolls, it was very stiff and there was some pain. So it's like, okay, I got to adjust myself. But I was still able to do some sequences and some bumps like normal. I was like, well, I'll be a bit limited, but as long as I take ibuprofen and wrap up, I think I'll be okay.
Right.
You know, it came down on a Saturday at Irving, Texas, or was it? No, Carthage, Texas, way up East Texas for SWE Fury. I mean, shout out to those guys as well. That's one of the shows Rodney got me on as well, which is nationally televised on the CW and it's all online and such. So it's a pretty big deal over there that's starting to grow. And before the show, there's always a clinic or a training / seminar. That's like their old school terminology of it. And again, you know, doing the rolls, I was okay. But for those that know the term, there's a term called an up and over, where you basically run to the corner, you kind of do a big squat, like a little squat, jump up, and do a mule kick like animation to where you land in the middle of the ring. It's like an evasive dodge in a way. So when I landed, same exact impact, but much worse because it was from a greater height. And I felt the same thing. Soda can, bam, fell down. And I'm like, God, what the hell is going on here? Like, this is serious now. Like, what the hell? And I think that's what aggravated it because, again, once the adrenaline sort of went down faster because it wasn't during a match, same thing. The calf and my knee area, the early predictions, because it was an EMT there, the early prediction was like, oh, it might be something with the MCL or the meniscus. And I'm like, crap.
Yeah, that sounds just, again, you know those injuries. You've heard them forever, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm like, Jesus, like, what am I going to do? Because I've never been out for an extended period of time, minus the dislocated shoulder. But that was only technically 6 weeks. And that was when I was barely getting my foot on the gas pedal. So it wasn't like right now where I'm almost every weekend doing something somewhere at a high level as best as I can. So this time I finally listened to my body and I was like, okay, I'm going to get an appointment. I'm going to get checked and everything. And of course, that Sunday morning when I woke up, the pain was much worse. Same thing as that previous Monday. I'm like, this is not good. I need to know what's going on. So finally I got checked, and the doc was astonished. I don't want to say like astonished, but he was like a bit shocked. He's like, well, we can't give you an MRI yet because your leg is so swollen. It might be obstructed of the view, and we don't want you to waste your money on that just yet.
Jesus.
So he was doing me a favor, thankfully. He wasn't one of those, oh, you gotta get checked.
Get an MRI today and get one next week. And no, just wait.
No, thank
wait
God.
Till the leg can, get less swelling. Sure.
Yeah. So I had to be like on a bunch of anti-inflammatories and all that kind of stuff, like these pills I had to take to help it go down. And I would do like these stretches and exercises that the doc recommended, ice and heat. I would do that like late at night when I'm not doing anything, like when it comes to watching training or just moving around a little. And it's like, it was starting to feel a little bit better. Like the swelling went down dramatically. I didn't feel as much pain. It was just like something was in the way and preventing me to move it certain ways. And later, I find out that this was one of the factors of what I found out the prognosis was finally. So I got the MRI, my very first ever MRI done. And it took 3 days later, 4 days later, finally get the results back, like on a disc to where the doc can look at it in a very detailed manner. His prediction was pretty much the same, as in, it's either a strained calf or a strained MCL, because signs are saying that there may not be a tear because you're still able to walk and somewhat sit down for periods of time and squat and whatever. And he found out the same day I did, and he was immediately shocked. He's like, well, boss, your MCL and your LCL are strained, but as you can see right here, your ACL is at a complete tear. And I'm like, what? And he was shocked too, because that was not even an option in his mind from checking me. And that wasn't a discussion at all. And apparently either that day at the show or at the training, it was already there, but of course it got worse. And that's what happened. And it's like, oh my God, this is not even a partial tear. This is not a strain. This is a complete tear. So therapy at this point would probably be useless because like it's a tear. It's not something
that can't reattach itself if you work out and do stretches and PT.
Yeah. So there was the option on the table of surgery and the orthoscopic surgery. And I got told in a great detail what they would do. Like for those that are wondering, literally what they were going to do. I wish I remembered the name of this tape. They called it a tape, but it was like this really strong, thin wire / rope that said, if even 10 football players would pull on this, it wouldn't budge. It's like a very strong like thing that they're going to put in there. And they were going to do, I think, 2 incisions and put those in there in place and take a piece of the hamstring to put there as well, to where it's like, it's going to be like new, even stronger once it's 100%. And once I got told that, it's like, well, it's not like they're going to cut like a 6-foot incision in me and take all this stuff out.
Make you turn you into a robot, in your leg. But like, here's a little piece of artificial stuff, a piece of your hamstring, and we can do it nice.
Work with that, So that was the whole story from nearly a month of waiting to find out what the hell was wrong with me. And unfortunately, it was the worst possible scenario, a complete ACL tear. And I'm still, awaiting the appointment with the surgeon to when surgery is going to be set. And then I was told it's going to be at least 6 months post-surgery with recovery. And I'm looking to go as hard as I can on recovery because I want to be back as soon as possible, but as safe as possible, 110%. So my early predictions, like I mentioned in the video that I posted on the fan page, is that I may be back later this year, or if not early 2022, just to be on the safe side. So this was a big, gut punch, a big running into a brick wall, because I've never been in this situation, and I'm kind of getting used to like, oh, I'm not going to wrestle, train, or do anything physical for a long time. So it's like, holy crap, like, what do I do? I'm still processing it, but I've come to an understanding, and this is where I'm thankful that I wasn't only trained in wrestling. Like, I was also trained on like how to run music, how to be a manager in a way, like getting reps out there, how to edit, how to announce, commentate, do highlight videos. Like, I'm willing to give back to this business as best as I can by serving what I can do, instead of just, oh, I'm just a wrestler, I can't do anything else. Like, I still want to contribute while be on the shelf, just to show that, hey, I'm more than just this. I'm here to at least be here, not just sit and wonder what's next,
I think that's the smart move, and I think lots of promotions would be happy to have your services outside of the ring. And from what I saw on social media, that you're getting booked outside of your wrestling gigs, and so that's cool, man. And part of what you're doing also, and still contributing, and why I reached out to you was that, like, well, this podcast has a professional wrestling fan audience in a certain regard too. It has a whole lot of overlap because of the people I cover. But I've had wrestlers, promoters, and former wrestlers on, and now you. But I think that's smart of you to look at other avenues within the business. They do that even on the largest scale, right? Like at the WWE, somebody gets injured or something's going on, and so they get put again in a manager role, in a commentary role, and have little, other things they can do as they heal. And you have this interesting background. Tell me again your degrees.
I have a major in communications with a minor in theater arts.
Right. And so, like, of course, put him on commentary. Of course, put him in somebody's corner to do a promo, for a tag team. Like, that's what I would do if I was a promoter. I'm like, well, okay, yeah, well, let's just wait till he gets better. So I love that, man. I admire that. I think that's, I think that's just good for you and good for the people you're connected with. What advice would you give to, young, aspiring, independent pro wrestlers?
That's a good one. This goes back to what I mentioned earlier about the blueprint, the game plan. Just because something may not work that you're trying doesn't mean that it's the end all be all, whether it be like a certain thing you want to try or a certain role you want to play. There's no game plan when it comes to wrestling. It's so many different avenues when it comes to as low as basics to as high as, hey, psychology or having a character or trying to portray someone that you are to a level 11 or someone that you're not to level 11. And that to basically just not to give up, just to put your heart into it as much as you can. Because if you give back to this business by giving your 110%, it will give back 115% and so on and so forth, because that's what a lot of people look for. Someone that are dedicated, someone that are willing to get better, willing to learn. And there is no like, oh, like you're expected to get here in this amount of time and that amount of time. Everybody has their amount of time on progressing, and to be very patient, to be very willing to perfect it as best as you can. And one of my favorite things is to not do something until you get it right. It's to do something until you can't get it wrong. And that's everything in wrestling, from the basics to moves to character work to whatever you want to do. And to especially be ready for that in the sense of wrestling, of where to get the reps in. That's one of the most important things that I would like to drill into people's heads. Reps, reps, reps. As many times as you can, as many times as you should. I mean, even more than you should in certain cases. You never know. People look for that dedication and look for that effort. That's a small piece of what I would say, especially for those just starting out, no matter what age, because people could start in their 20s, their teens, their 30s. Anybody could start at any time and give in some sort of impression, whether it be good, great, or even bad, but hopefully more good than bad. But That's how I see it with everybody usually.
I like that point of getting again getting the reps in, and that at most things, any kind of craft, any natural talent only gets you so far. I'm not a believer of like, oh well, talent will super. No, like the reps, the work, like the people that put the work in, the cream rises to the top in the wrestling world, in the writing world, any other sort of art forms, sports, combat sports, and so on. That if you put in the work, you can really excel with those reps and getting the practice in. It's like, well, I always tell people, I'm like not good at basketball because I haven't sat at the free throw line and done 100 in a row. I haven't.
Right.
And so how can I expect to be good at that? But I've spent a whole lot of time writing. I've spent a whole lot of time fixing cars and motorcycles, and I got the reps in there. And so if you have something that you believe in and want to do, that's imperative to it, even if you are maybe gifted at it. But you got to get the practice in. And so I think that's good advice for wrestlers and in life. So I think you're very smart to say
definitely.
So this is the Writers and Fighters podcast, and you are clearly in the fight world because you are a pro wrestler. But do you do any writing or reading?
Well, I don't like when it comes to reading, I don't read as much as I used to. Like nowadays, like I would read autobiographies of like wrestlers, or if like certain books and like have an impression on me, like from school that I never really got to focus on because it's back in the time. It's like, oh, I got to do this for an A versus like, oh, let me try to enjoy it instead of getting pressured to like get
100%. Yeah.
So in that sense, it's been kind of lost on me, but I'm always open to like read whenever I get the chance. And then interestingly, when it comes to writing, I used to contribute to Pro Wrestling Torch and do live reports online, like
Did
in
you?
Laredo. Yeah, Laredo and Chicago shows.
That's so
Yeah,
cool.
because I'm really big on stats, like big on records. Like that's always been me. I'm not sure why. So it's like, hey, here's the report from because I would go to Chicago, like the Chicago area in the winter and the summer, like to visit family in Bartlett, like a suburb in Illinois. And it was always the Christmas tour in Chicago and around that area. And I would always go to that arena, and I would always, contribute there. Like, oh, these are the results. This was the crowd. And I was really big on that. So for a while I did that. And also, and this might sound, this might sound really,
you little bootleg wrestling journalist,
no, I wasn't a Meltzer. I wasn't like this move stuff.
Dave Meltzer.
I just reported.
But that's cool. So a little correspondent out there. That's neat, man, for PW Torch. Very cool.
Yeah, I did that for like probably 6 years until, I don't know, I guess I kind of stopped because they didn't really take any more detailed stuff. So I was kind of like, if they're going to like heavily edit it, it's like, what's the point? It's just like, oh, this happened. It's like, it was fun while it lasted, but I did it for a little while, and the reports are probably somewhere hidden there, but they're still there, I'm guessing, hopefully, So there's that. And also this might sound, because I don't know, I know some people nowadays do this, like from the indies to even wrestlers like Tommy Dreamer and Chris Jericho that do this, but I have a document on my laptop of every single match I've ever wrestled, with where it was, what the match was, the date and the time and the result and everything. Like I'm a big statistician, like I have that with me, on document, on file of every single match. And it's kind of like, oh, whenever I hang the boots up, like for the final time, it's like, hey, check out everything I've ever done in writing, guys, or in typing. And here's the document right here. And videos too. I record every match I'm in as much as I can to study and, see what I could have done better, what looked good, bad, and just to have documented proof of, yep, this happened. Here's the link, stuff like that.
No, that's really cool to document your own career that way and have a good kind of a bank of your trajectory. And yeah, I think that's super cool. Like I only recently got organized with like my own like writing and stuff like that. And several years ago, I had a laptop stolen, I had a bunch of writing and all this stuff. So it felt like starting over. Like, imagine if somebody just erased like the first, 30 entries of your spreadsheet with your, it'd be like, what the fuck? How do I get that back? And I can't get it back. They say, just move forward. So I think that's a really smart thing. So I'm going to tell you, put that shit on the cloud also. And so
I actually send it to myself on Messenger too. Sometimes. Like,
you got it up. Yeah. Just have it in a few places and stuff, but that's really smart of you. And again, that might be a really good resource for people in the future and stuff like that. So that's cool, man. And I also admire the PW Torch contributions. I think that's really fun, man. Last little bit here.
Yeah,
you're in recovery and stuff like this, and in healing from your injury. But how can people keep up with your journey and with Dyl Dempsey online?
I'm a pretty simple guy. Like, when it comes to online, I'm mainly like on Facebook, Instagram. I don't get on Twitter a whole lot because I never really got accustomed to it. I've always been a Facebook guy versus a Twitter guy, but I have it just so like a promotion could tag me for their flyers that they post on Twitter. So it's not just a blank entry like, oh, there's one guy in the flyer without a username. What's going on there? So it's just it's there. Like, I'll get the notification, but mainly on Facebook. I have like my personal page, which is Dylan Wells. I do share my stuff there off the Dyl Dempsey page on Facebook, which is just Dyl Dempsey, where I post highlights, promos. I promote what I'm doing and when I'm doing, like especially with upcoming shows, events that I'll be a part of. And on Instagram, all lowercase, it's Dempsey 956, where same thing, except in pictures. I'll post like throwbacks. I'll post like current up-to-date stuff that's going on, maybe a video here or two. And on Twitter, like I said, I don't really get on it, but it is Dempsey ROR 913. If you ever want to like check that out, there's almost nothing on there, but sure, I'm a reference to tag. And then you can find stuff on YouTube as well. People have recorded over the years, like for their shows or for their like vlogs and stuff, if you want to see stuff. And it's pretty simple in general. It's not like, oh, like here's my LinkedIn, here's my MySpace. It's like, whoa, hold on, that's too much to remember for me. So I sure. Those three avenues mainly.
Sweet, man, sweet. So we'll direct people over there and get people following you and stuff, and maybe check out some of your old matches. But dude, just thanks for doing this. You're one of the folks that was quite kind to me there, working, largely with 5-Star Wrestling and those lucha at the library shows, but a couple of other gigs where we run into each other. And again, we had a good, fun rapport. Like we were barely acquainted. And then I would tease you by just putting sad reactions on all your Facebook shit. And you tease me about it at shows. And so aside from, us goofing off and playing around in the fraternity of the pro wrestling world, I admire you as a person. I think it's great you finished your degree. Shout out to your pops, dude. I'm proud of you, buddy.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, my man. This was a fun look back, going back in time to where we are now from starting to having the injury. It was fun, to collect on that.
No, yeah, dude. It was a good talk and a fun journey. So we'll be in touch, buddy. And once you heal up and you have your comeback, open invite. You got it?
Yes, sir, my man. I got you.
All right, buddy. Take care.
Take care, my friend. Thank you.
All right, y'all. I hope you enjoyed that interview. I know I sure did. Dyl Dempsey, good man. If you want to keep up with him, follow him on social media. On Facebook, just type in Dyl Dempsey, DYL Dempsey, like Jack Dempsey, the boxer. On Instagram, Dempsey956. On Instagram, Dempsey956. On Twitter, it's Dempsey ROR 913. Dempsey ROR 913. There'll be links, hyperlinks in the show notes. You can also keep in touch with him if you follow us. At ridersandfighters.com, you'll find all the social links. We're on everything. Another quick thing I want to mention is on April 24th, 5 Star Wrestling is holding a show called Reality Bites, a fundraising event for Dylan. $10 for adults, $5 for kids. It's going to be in Laredo, Texas. I have a little viewership there in Laredo, so spread the word. All you wrestling guys, you guys are connected. Share that stuff. Show up there. Spend some money. All right, y'all. Be good. Be safe. Take care of each other. We'll see you next week.